Greetings, my young and bold listeners. Today we have a very special video for you. This is one that I've been working on, or at least I've been working on the concept of it for a very long time. And this has only been about now when I can actually get into video format. But first, we need to change our costume. And since it was recently the holidays, we are now changing to Christmas Rider. And now, it's time to present to you my very first constructed language, the language of Kasyig. I am Constitutional Writer, and this is Beginning of New Worlds. Voi ithre Kasyig thucate kultugja fifiagasp. Tugsys roiach e thulgalsh kelid nikate. Ke katelat asige delath tesiegasp runyakuska kurunyalonyed huth lu. Kele rothilath denek Kasyig nija taladesh tekake halud tizihakesa susa. Ke asyegasp rathunye telusase ilathre akikenya runa ke asyegasp nilidenyeja kizesusase lu. If you cannot tell from what I just read you, which I probably pronounced a few things wrong, Kasyig is an agglutinative language. It's also my very first one, as I mentioned earlier, so if there are problems and you are a very experienced conlanger, please feel free to put any criticisms or suggestions in the comments below. But first, Kasyig is my first conlang, yet again, that I created for a fictional world. I will get into that fictional world probably at near the end of the video, but it has a somewhat small inventory. It's got a few strange valve. It's got auxiliary verb tenses. It has animacy, at least in some of the later languages. But it's partially synthetic. It contains verb agreement, variable word order in most cases, and also gender agreement, though the gender is not very strong in this language. And inspirations for it are taken from Maori, German, Gaelic, especially Scottish Gaelic, and some of Biblaridian's conlangs. If you do not know who he is, I would highly suggest checking him out. Before we get started, first need to talk about what's the family tree of Kasyig and what's its phonology. So Kasyig is actually, so far, it's four main languages. The proto-language, Kapasoyeka, and then we had Talad Kasyig, or Old Kasyig, and then we have Tea Kasyig and Aflugja Kasyig, which are the two main ones that are spoken in the modern day of the world, or modern time in accordance with the world. There are also various regional dialects of the language, not really so much with the Aflugja Kasyig, but with Tea Kasyig. There are a few regional dialects from the south. And that leads us into our phonology, which I'll be covering mostly Northern Kasyig in this video, so most of the stuff I'll be talking about is specifically tied to Northern Kasyig, as it is the most finished and developed of all these languages. And I'm still working somewhat on Tea and Kasyig. So, North Kasyig phonology consists, this is the consonant chart, it consists of the consonants p, b, t, d, k, g, th, s, th, h, ch, j, n, ny, r, l, r, y, and w. This is a pretty varied inventory. It's definitely grown since the proto-language, as proto-language did not have any voiced at all, and also did not have any affricates. Affricates are added later. Um, However, the R is also a new addition because the Pro language originally only had the raw instead of raw, and but it did keep around the glottal ha, even into the modern day, which a lot of our own real world languages have dropped that letter. Um, Onto the valve, we have um, this is where Kasyig gets differs a little bit because this is my first language, I wanted to be different. Might have not turned out as good as I was hoping, but we have I, U, E, O, A, and and E, A, O, and U can have long variants of the vowel. As you see, this does not have the vowel of E, which is probably one of the more common vowels across all languages. E instead is given as a diphthong in certain instances. But for syllables, they can get pretty complex. The main thing is that the final syllable of a word, in most cases, if it's a multi-syllable word, in most cases, it cannot end with a back vowel or a non-obstruent consonant. It cannot end with a non-obstruent consonant or a back vowel. So that's in most cases, though there are some irregularities to this rule. So now we move on to probably one of the most important parts of the language, the grammar. I'll go over like each different type of words there in the language, the different aspects that are given to each of them, and then I'll talk about a few other extra stuff in the end. So we'll first talk about verbs. Um, Verbs, at least in Northern Kasyig, have valency changing operations for passive, causative, and obligative. And also, valency changing operations are optional. In variable word order, they're often not used. In a more fixed word order sentences, valency changing operations are more commonly used. We also, then, tenses it takes are past, perfect, habitual, and the future. Past and perfect are both according to the past. It just depends on where. Actually, past, perfect, and habitual are all past tenses. It just depends how it happened in the past. Past is general. Perfect is it's happened in the past, and habitual it was happening for a while or is continuing to happen from starting in the past. And then we have agreement. So verbs must agree with the nouns that come before them. So they take the take agreement for whether the noun is single or plural, whether it's first, second, or third person, and the order that the agreement appears in is important, especially in variable order sentences, as the order the agreement appears on the verb is the order in which they appear in the sentence. And then we have affixes. Just basic affixes that change the basic root of the verb. And in some cases, there are some extra affixes which appear and seemingly out of nowhere. And then we move on to nouns, which are probably have the second most out of all the different types of words. So first they take the most different affixes even take more affixes than verbs, even though verbs have more to them than nouns do. And a lot of those affixes depend on the animacy of the noun. There is an animacy system in here. Nouns technically are a free word order in Northern Kasyig, but more often than not, they do appear in a more fixed order just to make it easier to understand. And free word order usually is for like harder to conceive sentences, which would be given in a more like debate type sense instead of just everyday language. Yeah, possession also depends on animacy. Possession marking is given depending on what animacy is. Usually a lower animacy thing cannot possess a higher animacy thing, and if a higher animacy one is the possessor, then it does not receive an extra marking, and it's only the possessee is the one that receives the marking. There are 3 genders in Kasyig, Northern Kasyig specifically. Almost all nouns are innately neuter, with only specifically feminine and male nouns being male or female, but they can be changed by changing the root of the word and adding affixes on to make a word innately another one of the genders. This can only apply to neuter nouns. You cannot change, say, a male to a feminine noun or a feminine noun to a male noun. And speaking of animacy, I'll go ahead and move on to that now. There are three levels of animacy in here. We have Talkied, Kanulkitue, and Teretue, which are humans, alive but not humans, and then just non-living things in general. This also shows what for plurals. So plurals, here I go showing you here. So we have Akyid, which is person, which is a Talkied noun. Paradir, which is a Kanul noun. And then Wachaus, which is river, which is Teretoe, or non-living. So they'd receive different plural mark. So that'd be Talkied for person, for people, when you're referring to multiple people. Capera for multiple deer, and Telechaus for multiple rivers. There's also for animacy. Okay, so this is where I'm gonna go over some stuff to do with possession. This is what you do for the possessee. So all possessees are marked, and you only mark the possessor if it is equal to or higher than the animacy of the noun that's possessing. So, yeah, it's either thite, thikate, or thita. And then now we move on to a few other things to do with grammar, such as some specific word orders that are usually used, like adjectives usually appear before nouns, adpositions appear before nouns and adjectives. Auxiliary verbs always come after the main verb. And yeah, it was originally an SOV language, though, yeah, like I said before, it's technically a free word order for everything except verbs, which always have to appear last in a sentence, but all other words can have variable word order. Now that we're done with grammar, we move on to one of my favorite parts of it, and actually probably one of the hardest parts of the language, is the writing system. So Northern Kasyig is actually the only part of Kasyig that has its own writing system. New Kasyig and Old Kasyig, they did not have their own writing systems, and they had to borrow them from the empire that took them over. But Northern Kasyig has the Nulugasyige and the Teosyige, which are the two different scripts. Or English, close to English translation, are basically like the stone writing or stone words and the common words. So the Nulugasyige was the original script that was created for Kasyig. You can see it's very angular. I mean, this is not fun. I had to hand draw these on a computer, so they're a little wonky, but they were mostly carved into sources like stone or wood, and they can actually appear in two ways. They can appear from left to right, or they can appear top to bottom, depending on who you decide to carve them. And then the Tilstige are a more flowy script, a lot of which is basically simplifying a lot of the forms of the Nulugasyige, though a few new ones were created, and technically the Tausige can be written in a cursive kind of form, but that is mostly not the case. In the modern language, the old Nulugasyige is mostly written on like more official or for Oriental purposes, while the Tosyige is the more common writing form for the language. Alright, so now we have covered some of the more important parts of the language, grammar and writing system and such. So now it's time to move on to the history so far of this language. So let's begin. The world of Yastre has many languages and people spread across the vast area, but one of the most smallest yet widespread in geographical terms is the Kasyig people. The Kasyig people originated in the small island or continent of Zelantis, though to them it was Ilastre. Zelantis is what it eventually came to be called. by the outside world. So Zelantis, the first Kasyig people, is unknown exactly when they first came or appeared on Idathre. So, but the first ever Kasyig civilization was built around the southwest of the major island in the continent, and it was based around the mountains and forests in that area. Now, over time, from that area, more Kasyig tribes spread out and populated more of the area, though they mostly stayed to the north and west of the center mountains. A group did go south and beyond them and into the forests and tundra of the area. They were the most diverse, and they had their own version of Kasyig that is no longer around, and no records of it remain. So the Kasyig existed for a good while until the Empire came. Zelyria had already united Arventus at this time and was now spreading to other areas, first south to what they called Zelantis. Now they originally only populated the northern island and just began sending expeditions south until they landed on the two southernmost land masses in that area. Now first they just met with the Kasyig people, and trade was the main intercourse between them. Now, it was over this time that the Kasyig people began to more take interest in the outside world, as it was not only Zelyria that spread to their land, but also the Caliphate of Meritor from Arakas. Now, Meritor was in more search of land and conquest than Zelyria was, which originally was mainly bent on trade and discovery and influence instead of just completely owning the land. But Zelyria soon entered its dark days, during which they began bringing large amounts of Kasyig people to other parts of their empire to kind of serve as their servants and the working class. This, however, was fiercely opposed by many of the original Kasyig people, some of which were either killed or enslaved on their southern island. However, one tribe, which was the original civilization of Kasyig on the southern continent between the mountain and the forest, resisted. They began forming into more of a modern society at that time, and began to gain weapons and experience from other nations in order to combat and preserve their independence. After many of their people were destroyed or enslaved, Meritor gave the final straw, as they sent expeditions south of the mountains and completely destroyed the Tundra Kasyig civilization, as well as their language, which is why no records of it exist today. The remaining Kasyig tribes, mainly on the southwest peninsula, united into the first ever Kasyig United Nation, and they used their power to combat the enemies invading their continent. At first they were successful in maintaining their independence until Zelyria was able to bring their powerful military to bear. They quickly overwhelmed the kingdom's defenses and quickly seized the capital and killed the king and enslaved most of the population. After this collapse, this was called the split, or the divergence in the Kasyig people, as the remaining free people of the Southwest Peninsula decided that they could no longer maintain their ancestral home and decided to flee, abandoning their southern landmass to search for a new homeland. It was thought, since no record of them existed for over 1,000 years, it was thought that they had been lost at sea and were no more. Over that time, Zelyria fought wars with Meritor and eventually entered its darker, more destroyed years, where it started losing land. And this let more of the Kasyig tribes of the southern continent gain basic independence, though nominally they were still under Zelyrian control. Until we get to our modern day, it is such that now, after all these years, as Zelyria slowly been losing its ground, they managed to regain some of it from Meritor, but the Idathre was finally able to regained some semblance of United Nations around the modern year between 1805 and 1816. Now, this is where the northern Kasyig people come in, as the expedition that set out was indeed not lost at sea, but managed to find a secluded island to the far north of the continent, beyond even the nations of Keonia and the tribes of the Neamic and Norse tribes of Norsil, the northern continent. There, they found refuge, and were able to build their own small but thriving civilization in the far north, as their cousins to the south toiled in their ancestral lands and were fought over by warring powers. So that is kind of brief history of the Kasyig language. It was not scripted, so I might have stumbled at some points, but it gives you a general idea. And if you are interested at all in what I just described, the world is actually still being built on the Discord server of Beginning of New World. So if you like world building, then please come and join. We are currently in the year 1916, or 1816. Sorry about that, and it's going really good. We have a lot of the nations constructed so far, so you can come in and try to take over some of the NPC nations, or you can create your entire new nation. And that's it for today's video. This should be coming out on Tolkien's birthday, which is January 3rd, and I thought it was fitting because I was originally inspired to do this language by reading Tolkien's work, while watching Lord of the Rings, and then Bibloridian's videos kind of pushed me over the edge. So I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and hope to see you on the channel. And if you like this at all, please subscribe and maybe give this video a like. I'm Constitutional Rider, and this is the end.